You can pretty much become unstoppable with a very strong early mid-game build that gives you great heal on hit, lots of defenses, and massive stuns. Also quite a few items that you might have overlooked but definitely should not, as they can completely change your playstyle around when combining them into this build. As always, if you enjoyed this video, a sub to the channel would be awesome, so let's dive right in. Now this build makes use of the Nidavellir chest for the stunning restoration. Stun grabbing now grants a health burst, so whenever you're doing any of these R3s with the button, you're going to get a nice heal over a couple of seconds with it. And the set bonus we're gonna use with it is that of the Raven Tears, as all healing, especially coming from gear, is now increased by 30%, making our healing a lot more efficient. I've upgraded the armors quite a bit in this footage, but as you can see, all of them provide a mix of the perfect stats for this specific build, between the strength, defense, vitality, and of course also a bit of luck, as you'll soon come to find out that's going to be a bit important. Now the reason why especially defense is such a massive requirement for this build is specifically because of the Svartalfheim enchantments. We're gonna cover how you can get these items towards the end of the video. In the meantime, I'm going to focus on the set bonus on these three because it's just amazing for the stun build. Basically, they buff stun damage inflicted on enemies based on our defense. And our defense is pretty decent with this build, 476, which is not too shabby. So the more defense we have, the better the stun will be. So much so, in fact, that I can pretty much one-shot stun almost any enemy of the regular size. And in the case of the mini-bosses, like maybe 2 casts, and finally a bigger boss, well, it just doesn't survive long enough to even get stunned. The other set I'm using is that of Niflheim to further buff melee damage, also based on our defenses, but when above 75% HP, which with the abundance of heals that this build has, hopefully will be enough to keep you at that pace. For the rest, I went with the Vanaheim for another melee buff, and this time around when damaging status afflicted enemies based on luck. And guess what? Our luck is actually pretty good with this build, since we get it from the items and the enchantments, and we're gonna be able to constantly apply statuses like Frost and Fire anyway on enemies from the primary weapons. Now, to make this build complete, there are 2 weapon attachments for the axe and the blades, and the perfect axe grip is going to be the grip of the Healing Harmony. When permafrost skill gauge is filled, our hits will restore HP, but incoming damage is also increased. Not really a problem, because the kicker here is that it doesn't just work on the permafrost by itself, but also on its upgrades. So while permafrost can have the gauge reset if you get hit, if you activate its upgrade called glacial permafrost with the L1 and triangle, you don't have to worry about that and will still benefit from the heal, since it's still considered, technically speaking, a permafrost skill. And with this, you're going to get a ton of healing effects on every single hit, which are now also going to affect enemies from range. This will take care of the healing portion of the build. Now let's talk about the awesome stuns. So for the Blades of Chaos, the best handle is the one called Hardened War Handle, which makes your Hyperion Grapple and the Hyperion Pull to do extra damage and especially extra stuns. A big accent on the Hyperion Grapple with the first and second upgrade that I previously talked about, and why I think this is one of the game's best moves. Not only do you get launched forward towards your enemy, closing the gap faster, but the initial connection interrupts any of their attacks, including the red ones, and the impact on reach is quite large, so that it can deal damage to multiple enemies if they happen to be close enough. That's also the reason why the mod choice over here is going to be stun, as the damage is plentiful enough. Anyway, gameplay wise, this build is very versatile and I suggest using both weapons, but here is how I usually do it. In boss fights, I always like using Hell's Touch for a quick stun fill, and you can actually cast it 2 times in just 60-second cooldown. We're gonna talk about in just a little bit how you can get this. I always like jumping in the combat, starting with the axe and then building up permafrost ASAP. We already talked about an awesome early combo that you can do with the Glacial Rake and some of the other permafrost skills to quickly fill the weapon gauge. So if you want to see that, totally check the previous video out. Another trick I suggest learning is of course the Frost Awaken 4 trick, which lets you instantly charge your weapon with Frost Awaken right after every hit, even if it was a previous Frost Awaken attack. So in this case, you can just do it constantly and just like throw enemies up and quickly build the frost and everything on your weapon. But once Permafrost is built, this is when you're going to want to go ahead and activate the Glacial variant with the L1 and triangle, point at which your damage is going to turn up even higher and you're going to get heals on every single hit. This is also going to build freeze status effect on the enemy to further get the benefit of weapon damage bonus from the Vanaheim runes. Against anything else, I heavily encourage you using the blades, especially if you find yourself in tight situations or when you have to defeat a high number of enemies in a very short time. Like for example, the Muspelheim challenges come to mind. It was so easy to clear these out with the grappling mechanic, as I was just able to constantly stun every single enemy. Even the big bosses, for example, don't get more than a couple of hits before they get stunned in this case, so you can use them as easy snacks to replenish your HP, even if they don't technically get downed just yet. The only possible downside I can think of is against a limited number of boss encounters that make your grapple kinda useless because it bounces off their armor, so in that case I recommend just sticking with the axe. By the way, good thing to note is that if you fill the momentum bar with the blades and then switch to the axe instead, or vice versa, you can activate its version like the permafrost or the emulation option to get that going and deal more damage. Now, one thing we haven't discussed is the shield attachments, and in this case the shield that I'm using is obviously going to be the Dauntless. Yes, it's high risk, high reward, but like the stun that you get from it is just way too good to pass, and it just blocks like every other shield in there. The runs that you get come in a little bit later, much later as a matter of fact, so that's why I kind of left them at the end. The best probably is going to be the round of absorption that you get just as you finish the main story. So this is going to make it so that if you block or parry, it's going to also fill that permafrost or emulation gauge so that you can immediately jump into using the weapon after doing some blocking. Anyway, as promised, we're gonna talk about how you can basically find all of these items to create the build. So for the hardened war handles, you need to head over inside this cave in the south area of Alfheim's Forbidden Sands, so it's not too far off in the game. Inside, you will have to free the mechanism from some of these vines and then turn it in such a way so that it's facing the exit, so that you can bounce your axe off the second mechanism right into the nearby tendrils. And then you're going to find the handle right inside of the golden chest. The Grip of Helheim Harmony unfortunately comes a bit later on your first visit in Helheim, and it's pretty much unmissable. At some point you're going to have to close down a hell tier in the area, so you are going to get that as a reward from it. For the attachments, you're going to find most of them by simply completing side quests in different realms, but I'm mostly going to focus just on the Svartalfheim ones since they are the most important. So you get all 3 pieces from 3 separate side quests, all in the river delta in Vanaheim, right here in the south of the region. But this only happens after finishing the Reckoning main quest, so that would be around the middle of the game. These are pretty quick and require you to find just a couple of items for each remaining ghost. So if you want to get the fortune one, you do it from the favor called Cure for the Dead that you find right here on the shores in the west, on the same place with the Berserker fight. The honor variant, you get it from the Conscience for the Dead just across the river stream next to the teleport gate in the area. And finally, you get the safety amulet version from the Garden for the Dead right here in the same garden that you also got one of the Lunda pieces in the area. And finally, even though it's not 100% needed to make this build work, you can also get Hell's Touch for the low cooldown and the massive stuns, especially when fully upgraded. It's basically done through the favor called Song of the Sands right here in the Forbidden Sands. So what you have to do is to just progress enough towards the end up until you reach this room, and then just clear the path using some of these reflective surfaces, climb up and reach this platform on the second level to grab the golden chest, which is going to give you that attack instead. But yeah, this is pretty much it with the build. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.